many of you have been to the study room before? On the way seen. Okay, so it's kind of packed the room. So it's one thing to talk about someone else's work, but it's a whole other thing to talk about your own work.
Yes.
It's sometimes hard to have a little distance on it. But thank you so much for inviting me, because this is really fun for me. Just to give you a little bit of background, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some of the work that I completed my thesis year in graduate school. So I'll start there, and then kind of highlight a few projects that I've done recently. And you can kind of begin to see the connections and some of the big leaps that I make in between those projects. But just to give you a little bit more background, and I'm happy to talk more about this at the end too. I graduated from Oklahoma State in 2003, and I taught for 3 years at a middle school, and I was the art teacher there. So I have my teaching certification, and then I wanted to go to graduate school. That was always my goal, and so I finally made it to graduate school in 2004. I get my dates mixed up here, but I taught for 3 years. So I came to graduate school in 2006 here in St. Louis, graduated in 2008, and have been working at the Art Museum since then, since I graduated, which I'll talk more about at the beginning or the end of this. But I also taught as an adjunct lecturer around town for 3 years here, so I was just working part-time at the museum, but now I'm there full-time, and it's been kind of an incredible trajectory, and something that was a little bit unexpected. So if you're interested in both making art and being in a kind of curatorial situation or in a museum or some sort of arts institution, feel free to ask me questions afterwards, because it's kind of an exciting combination of skills. So in graduate school, I was very interested, and I should say first that my background is not in sculpture, it's not in installation. I actually did printmaking in undergrad, which is why I'm working at the print study room now. And I love printmaking and drawing, but I have always had an affinity for three-dimensional materials, and I love sewing and soft sculpture. So that's kind of where I started at graduate school. I wanted to do something I'd never done before, and where I would have the resources and the feedback from my instructors to kind of confidently move forward in that area. I began this series of wearable objects in 2008, 2006, 2007 to 2008, my last year of graduate school. And I really became sort of interested in the body as my subject matter. So I always am thinking about the contemporary rituals of the body. I'm thinking about the pageantry of the body and the costuming of the body. And I'm always thinking, and I think we can probably all agree, that the body is a site of kind of social power exchange. You know, it's kind of a battleground. What we wear, what we, how our body appears, all of that is sort of judged or sends a message to people outside of us. You know, whether we want that to happen or not, that's just how we react in society. So, fashion, technology, all of these things that we have as kind of accessories to our body communicate something. And I'm interested in the kind of intersection between fashion, how we shape or adorn our bodies, technology, how we go beyond our own biology to kind of make ourselves superhuman. And then finally, this kind of self-regulation or this sort of DIY culture that allows us to kind of always sort of self-diagnose or actually kind of buy things that can help us somehow that we're lacking. And we do all of this both to sort of feel better about ourselves, to kind of get into a kind of promise or a deal with these objects, but also as a means to connect with others. So you can see that there's a lot of relational kind of issues that come up in my objects. So this first object that we're looking at is actually called the Ophelioscope, sort of a play on scopophilia. These oversized binoculars have these gloves that are attached, and once you actually put the object on, your body sort of becomes one with this sort of giant set of binoculars. When you look inside the binoculars and you turn on the light, there's actually a set of mirrored bulbs inside. It's a little bit difficult to see in the abstract, but here's one of the mirrored bulbs. This is where your eye would be here. And because there's two bulbs with mirrored exteriors, it creates a sort of infinite environment. And you're only looking at your own gaze. So it's this very kind of self-indulgent and voyeuristic kind of fantasy where you're just sort of repeating your gaze over and over and over again. And all of the materials are very sort of sensual, and there's kind of pink fur lining the interior. So it's a very kind of sort of erotic object, but only for one person. And the whole idea of binoculars is usually to sort of have a larger perspective outside of ourselves, to be able to see far, and the fact that you can only sort of see in a very sort of intimate and close range sort of says the opposite of what the usual function is. This object is called Tiresias harness. Underneath all those feathers is actually like a probably middle school kid's football harness that I've lined with satin and put these rooster feathers on top, and then attached these sort of movable gooseneck mirrors. So you can move them in any way so that you can get this sort of complete picture of yourself. But the interesting thing about wearing the harness is that although you do have a sense of your entire self, they actually sort of act as blinders and actually prevent you from having any sort of relationship with another person easily because they've blocked the way. Get a little bit more sensible inside. And Tiresias, I named it this because Tiresias is the blind prophet who said to Narcissus' mother that, as long as Narcissus is never aware of himself, he will be, sort of a healthy and happy being. But as soon as he becomes aware of himself, it will be his demise. And so, of course, Narcissus saw his own reflection in the water, and from then on, he didn't, he couldn't function without desiring that other being that he couldn't have. Here we have what's called the Bentham helmet. So the Bentham helmet has a security camera on one side and a television on the other side. So if you are on this end, then the person inside the helmet is actually looking at you inside of the helmet. And if you turn the panel around, which you can do, you're seeing the person in the helmet on the television screen. And I'm playing with this idea of surveillance. I think all of us have a sense that surveillance is part of our everyday environment, whether it's at the stoplight when you're driving your car, or for me at the museum, we're constantly on camera. Study room, we're always on camera.
You don't pocket it.
Yeah. So I like to think that we're beyond, we're used to it now, and in fact, we actually start to perform the camera in some ways. So we're sort of taking advantage of this new relationship with technology and performing. And also, if you think about our connection with one another has changed as we are entering this digital realm where we're actually removed. Our friendships are now, half of them are online, and we may not see that friend except for through a television screen or a mediated device. And so I'm playing with this idea of what is this kind of relationship that you can have with another person through this kind of mediated device. And it is this very sort of clunky helmet. You're blind and you can't hear much because things are muffled. You're tethered to an outlet, which I think is just kind of funny. And so the relationship, in a way, doesn't quite function like you would hope it would with this new technology. I love to play with failure in my work. I think that these objects are intended to satisfy desire in us, and then they ultimately kind of fail in a very humorous way. And you'll see humor and failure come up in my work quite a bit, because I think that there are two areas that are really interesting in art making because if you have a successful result, you already know what that's going to look like. But with failure, if something happens where unexpected results come up, and so A plus 1 plus 2 maybe not equal 3. There's something that kind of a new form that might come out of failure. And humor is similar, where we have a kind of strange relationship with humor where it's an unexpected response from your viewer, and can result in kind of unexpected ways of viewing objects or experiencing something. So I'm always wanting to kind of push those two areas. So I just want to talk to you about drawing because I haven't forgotten about my past, and drawing is really important to me. I make lots of different kinds of drawings. The page that you're looking at here is actually kind of a collection of drawings that I make for that are kind of models for what I'm going to make in terms of an installation or proposal. So the drawing here and the model here are models that I made for this past installation at Space Architecture. And then this is a proposal I made for the Luminary Center for the Arts, and then just other kind of ideas that I would like to kind of make or have made in the past. So that's one way that I work, are these sketches. Another way that I work that I actually love the most and I find the most freeing is I work with collage. I think especially those of us in art school are used to we're used to being asked why we do something, and we always have to sort of defend our ideas. And collage is a way to kind of subvert that, to just trust yourself visually and to play with forms that might feel unfamiliar, and to start playing with, I start playing with those, and oftentimes they inspire my work that does have more kind of conceptual grounding, or they inspire that kind of humorous relationship that I have with my forms. So you can see here this funny woman with the tongue coming out of her nose. So just kind of unexpected things that I find really gratifying to manipulate in that way. And then oftentimes I also do these very kind of finished, illustrative almost renderings. And these are usually once I've kind of worked out my ideas, and sometimes the work already exists in real life, and then I can just sort of play with a way of making a composition or pushing the kind of psychological undertones a little bit further. Here's another one I haven't made, but might be in my future. And I just wanted to do a little commercial break of my influences. So I think it's important to always kind of keep a collection of who your influences are, and some of mine on the upper left, Diana Sturbach, who made the remote control crinoline skirt. Ernesto Neto makes those soft forms in the middle, and he also plays a lot with herbs and spices, so he's really thinking about all of your senses. Ann Hamilton, the top right, who's always aware of the body. She's always creating installations or objects for or around the body. Krzysztof Wojczenko created this really amazing kind of outfit for Japanese students. In Japanese culture, it's often frowned upon to show emotion in front of your elders, and this was a way that you could turn your back but show emotion towards somebody that you want to express an opinion to. We have Claude, I'm forgetting. Cahoon, thank you. I was like, Laurent? That doesn't sound right. A surrealist photographer who played with gender roles. And Rebecca Horn here with her pencil mask, so actually creating these usable objects for the body where she would make drawings. Lydia Clark, a Brazilian artist who made the sensory masks, so each one kind of smelled slightly different. And she made a lot of projects like that. Rosemary Chockle, a German artist who knits a lot of sweaters, and I just happen to really love this little drawing here. But she makes these kind of knitted sweaters for two people, and sometimes they have kind of political messages, sort of signs on them. And then finally, hopefully you've been to the art museum recently, because we have a wonderful knit cave exhibition of I think a dozen of the sound suits that are just amazing. And he's going to be giving a lecture, I think, in February, so please come because there might be a performance in the middle of the lecture. I didn't say that. So you should come.
February?
It would be great. Yeah, February. And he's actually from Fulton, Missouri, so he's a local person. I think he even had like a store, like a thrift store slash fabric store here in Clayton, where he dyed fabrics and sold them. So after graduate school, I was still playing with wearable objects. And here I'm getting on with my life, and I start taking this very intensive workout class. It's like a boot camp. And I start thinking, like, why do we spend so much time and effort sculpting our bodies to look a particular way? And I was just trying to think of the kind of history of the body and in terms of sports, what that means. And I was thinking back to the earliest sort of Greek Roman, introduction of the Olympics, which, really was a kind of performance of battle or war. Sort of taking things that you do in war and you're actually making them a kind of activity or performance. And so my work really started to focus on this idea of actually physically sculpting the body and some of the strategies and rules and performance qualities that were behind sports. And I'm not very sporty, so it was extra intriguing to me. And so the other thing that I love about sports that I think that we totally overlook many times is that the costuming in sports is really over the top. I mean, if you think about the forms and shapes and the materials, the colors that we use are pretty amazing. And if you were an alien who came down from space and you saw these people on a field with lines and you knew something was happening, you would have no idea what was going on, and it would be quite a spectacle. So I really love that, and I like that, oftentimes it's a very sort of masculine, event, but then again, it's also, there's a lot of touching, there's a lot of wrestling, there's a lot of slippery fabrics and balletic moves. So there's a lot of just interesting things that happen, I think, in these very sort of masculine sports that I like to play with. So here's just a piece that I made, this kind of relationship piece where you're completely connected to one another, but you can't escape one another either, and just all of the things that you can do in kind of performance with these two costumes. So I'm also pushing my work. Up until this point, they all kind of were maybe used or shown off in a more pageant type way. But now I'm starting to actually move into performance. They still kind of hang on the wall, but then I am also manipulating them or having people wear them or showing them during parades or performances. Here's some drawings that I was doing around the same time, thinking about these objects that are connecting us, but also quite useless in terms of their function. Another performance that I did when I was in my studio, just for a small group of people, was to create these kind of hoods that were blinders. And I built a wall with a hole in it so that people had to stand behind the wall. And there was, girls with these hoods on, these hats on, and the viewer would look through a hole at these women who were doing kind of calisthenics, kind of typical workout sort of moves, but they were completely blind and they only had their markers on the floor to kind of guide them. And so it was just kind of an interesting psychological performance to have people look and spy through a hole at people that were blind, doing these sort of calisthenics. And just kind of playing with space and thinking about how the body, can move through space and how we, how we're looked at and how the body is sculpted. So I'm just kind of playing with all of these ideas. And at this time, I actually got I was awarded this time to actually make an installation in the luminary. And how many of you have been to the old luminary space? Okay, so a few of you. So the old luminary space, the new one, is actually on Cherokee Street, and it's such a great arts organization. If you can ever be an intern or get involved, I think they are so kind of forward-thinking in what they want to accomplish. But their old space was in this Art Deco building off of Kings Highway, and the original function of the space was a convent. It was, from the outside, it just looks like this plain box, but on the inside, right in the center, is this beautiful chapel with skylights and beautiful light. And so I was able to do whatever I wanted to with the space, and I was, kind of thinking about these sports-related themes, and I actually wanted to put my viewers into the position of the artwork rather than to create this sort of outfit or have a performer in there. And so I created a series of stations, and kind of playing off of this idea of calisthenic stations or sports kind of related stations like we would do in PE when we were kids, or the stations of the cross, since this is a religious space, and actually kind of thinking about moving through these different parts of the room which were symbolic. So we've got a couple of things happening. We have this lampshade piece that is hanging kind of from a little rod there that had the most amazing acoustics, which is kind of goofy because you're in the middle of a really wonderfully acoustic room. But you get inside of this and you can sing, but then no one can hear you outside of it, and you're blind to the rest of this kind of beautiful space. They have the altar space, which has gloves that you can slip your hands in so that you're sort of attached to this very kind of sacred space, and mirrors that you can see all parts of the room. So I wanted to physically connect the viewer with this sacred space. I was thinking about the nuns who would have originally inhabited this particular place, and everything about the room was to connect them to a higher being. And so I wanted to make that connection faster and easier, because that's what we're looking for, right? The fastest and easiest way to fulfillment. There's a big feather wall, so each of those is feathers that I inserted into the wall so that you could sort of rub your body or your face onto the outside of the feathers. There was a big velvet circle past that you could also kind of feel. There are these large gloves that were attached to the wall that really brought you close to the architecture, but then of course you're sort of awkwardly prostrated to the wall. The altar space. It's the inside of the little kind of acoustic space. And then there was a kind of mirror on the floor, which you probably saw too. And so another kind of commercial break of some of the artists that really kind of inspired, this particular series. There's a photographer, British photographer Ann Maree, who actually takes her studio space and totally creates these fantastical situations where it looks like some hermit living in a basement or a weird experiment happening. Things that don't usually go together, but you start to kind of tell a narrative through the objects. Bruce Nauman, who his most famous series is called Mapping the Studio, where he's actually kind of physically investigating the space, the creative space around him. Nathan Oliveira, the painter, who is creating these paintings and monotypes called Western Landscapes, where it's a completely sort of mysterious landscape, but very atmospheric. It sort of looks like the residue of an old Olympic stadium or something. Anne Hamilton at the Venice Biennial there, where she had braille embedded into the walls, and then kind of a red pigment that would fall on top of it. Martha Rosler in the center with her kids, schematics of the kitchen. Kirsten Haller, who did the slides in Turbine Hall at the Tate Modern. And Isa Ginskin, William Wegman there, and the photographer John Davola. So all people who are really looking at space in interesting ways. So after I did this installation at the Luminary, I also received a residency from them, which is something that you should also look into once you're out of school. And with the residency, we got a tiny little studio that actually used to be a nun's room. And this space was literally like 6 by 8 feet. Like, what can you make in a 6 by 8 foot space? And I was thinking, okay, I can make drawings, but what would I really do? And I wanted to really kind of investigate the space, because that's what I had been doing. And so I really started to kind of study a lot of the artists since, who from the 60s on were really thinking about the artistic process and their creative space as their subject matter. A lot of those artists are investigating kind of post-studio practice is usually what it's sort of labeled as. People like Bruce Nauman, any work that was done that was, manufactured rather than handmade, or using the space of the studio as part of the artwork itself, or people that are making artwork in the streets because the studio is no longer of interest to them, people that are making installations or performing, outside of the realm of the studio space. And one thing that I also started to investigate is what is the history of the studio space. The history of the studio space is that it's a sacred space, that it's a place where you go to regenerate, that it has some sort of energy there. It's typically known as this kind of masculine brooding space. And it's there that the artistic genius is able to be sort of let loose and brought out to the world. But it starts with that kind of nucleus of the studio. And I bet you anything that all of us here have a kind of a gut feeling like that there is something special about the studio. That even if the reality is not so romantic, that in your belly, you go to your studio and it feels a little magical. It feels a little bit different than working at your kitchen table. And so I love that. I love that kind of history. But then there's things about the history that I didn't love. That it was that you couldn't sort of generate work outside of that, or that it wasn't. I don't know that the romantic idea of having a studio is not the reality. I've switched studios 5 times since I graduated from graduate school, and now I'm in the basement of my house, which is great. But it's not as romantic as you think it's going to be. And I had to get over that, and I had to be flexible and ready to make art in any location. So I started with that in my thinking. And so I was thinking, okay, well, a nun used to live here. She used to pray here. She used to brush her teeth here. So she used to be engaged in rituals that were both mundane and spiritual. And so I wanted to be engaged in activities that kind of played with the space like that. So I have a full-time job, so I worked, 8 to 5 every day, but before work and after work, I would come to my studio and actually do little performances. And I wouldn't plan for them, I wouldn't choreograph them, I would just work with whatever tools or things that I had in my space or that I found around the building. The one thing I did do is I always wore this silly white sweatsuit and tried to really kind of remain this anonymous, or this very kind of have a sort of a specific attire for these sporting adventures. So here are some stills from this moment, and I should say that I streamed the whole 3 months of my residency, 24 hours a day. So you could go to the Ustream website, and you could always see what was going on in my studio at any moment. And then I could also record those moments. So when I actually did my performances, I would actually additionally record them. And then I had all this footage to work with afterwards. So you can see here some of the crazy things that I used, that I found or had, and played around with. This is a great story, actually. One of the benefits of the Luminary is that they're also a performance space, so they have a lot of really great bands that come through there, and they have a lot of things going on at night, which was great for me because I could only really work at night. And so I would do these performances, and I was in an exhibition, which was in their gallery downstairs, which was also their performance space for bands. So I had a television screen that was streaming my studio, all day down there. And so during these performances, I would be doing my exercises while the bands were playing down there. So it was nice that I had an additional audience that I didn't necessarily anticipate or expect when I started this project. So they could see what I was doing upstairs, and for most of them, I had no idea what was going on, but or that it was live. But I love the idea that they were, that they're just literally downstairs. So just looking again at artists who are thinking about studio space or artistic practice, there's Bruce Nauman mapping his studio. There's Sigmar Polka. We have those drawings at the Art Museum, where he's really thinking about this identity of the genius artist. And so I think the name of this picture is Artist in forgetting the name of it, but it's like artist sort of infiltrating the air with his presence. So it's a portrait of him, and you just wind this thing around, and it brings a kind of wind of genius to everyone around it. He also has one that I love. It's like where he takes a drawing and tears it up into tiny little pieces and puts it in a pill so that you can take it and sort of confusing, right? So really great. Erwin Worm, who does these really wonderful 1-minute sculptures that he then translated all those into photographs. And there's John Singer Sargent's very 19th century museum-style studio space where he would bring people in and everything was collectible and it was grand, and he was the sort of genius of his space. And then there are people who are thinking outside of the studio. Robert Morris, where he's building a box, and then the box inside of it has a sound of its own making. So you can hear the entire length of time and all the sounds that it takes to create that box. Marina Abramovich, always performing these different sort of rituals. Blinky Palermo and Gerhard Richter, they did this dual piece where they made busts of themselves in dialogue in the middle of a gallery space, which I thought was great. Richard Serra, who's throwing lead into the corner of his studio when he was getting started. Matthew Barney, a series called Drawing Restraint, where he tried to exert his body as much as he could to kind of make marks in the physical space of his studio, which you can see there on the ceiling. And then Jan Osterbach again, strapping a camera to a small terrier at the Venice Biennale and letting him loose in Venice, and then streaming it to one of the gallery spaces so that you can see this kind of low, Venice from this very low and funny vantage point. And then finally, Konstantin Brancusi, who towards the end of his life actually wouldn't let anybody take work out of his studio, because he said, this is where it was made, this is where it was intended, and I don't want it displayed outside of the studio. So if you go to Paris now, you'll see that they built a Brancusi museum, and rather than creating a whole new space for the object, they actually recreated his studio exactly like it was before they moved it. And so you can see that this exactly in the museum now. And so finally, in between the kind of space, the studio space project and in this project, I had a child, so that was a little bit of an interruption. And I had all this work that I just hadn't shown yet, so I really wanted to sort of get all of that work out into the world. And I like the idea that work doesn't have to be so sacred, that it can be sort of used in a lot of different ways. So I was invited to exhibit at Space Art and Architecture, another Art Deco building on Manchester in the Grove, and it's a working architecture firm. And most of the artists that I get invited to exhibit there try to pretend that it's not an architecture firm, that their stuff's on the wall, but they kind of ignore the fact that it's a working space, and that's fine. But I actually wanted to incorporate the firm into my installation, so I wanted them to kind of work in the middle of my installation, and also that their working sort of contributed to the overall sense of it. So one of the initial issues is that I wanted to show a video, and the video was from my studio footage. And they have this beautiful light-filled foyer, and they have a projector screen, but it's so light-filled there that you actually wouldn't be able to see the video very well. So I thought, well, I'm going to make some towers that you can get into physically, that you can see the video better. And then also like this idea of kind of creating communication towers or a kind of space station. So I was really playing with all of these things that kind of came out of my studio project. So I kind of started to feel like an astronaut in my studio, sort of, and trying to make contact with other people and trying to navigate this very kind of strange and foreign place. So here's someone actually inside my tower looking at my video. They have these big steel walls in the architecture firm because they're very modern. And so I really wanted to use that kind of metal feel and make this very kind of strange installation wall that almost looked like a lone person on a space station that was keeping track of all the messages and codes that were coming through to them. And so you have this very kind of strange OCD wall there, little code kind of braille things embedded in the metal. And I found these wonderful shorthand notes from like the 1930s in an antique store. And I had like 20 books of them, so I just started to take them apart. I mean, it just looked so strange and eerie, like someone was trying to communicate from another world. So, actually, perfect timing to show you my videos. So this is what I meant when I said I wanted to incorporate the entire architecture firm into the installation. So on every computer that was in the architecture firm, or most of them, I had a video playing and a sound component playing. So it really did look like this sort of activated space station. And here's some stills from the shades. Yeah. Some other kind of areas in architecture firm. Activated flags and really can't try to So one thing that I've been interested in that I use, that I just found on the internet, is shortwave radio station communication. So after the Cold War, there was a proliferation of these messages being sent out via shortwave radio because no one could track down who was making these messages. And they were often either real codes being sent out to spies, or they were codes that would appear that a message was being sent out as a kind of tactic. So,
That blind box.
So I took stills from my videos that I made. And put them back together into a stop motion animation. So this was what was playing in my tower. I love that, taking a still, re-animating it has such a different quality than just using, my full videos. So this is painting the towers, and then see if I can put in the towers here. bombardment of sound and beeps and all sorts of things happening during time. And I just want to emphasize how easily I made these just on my Mac computer with my camera. And I did this in my basement. So even though I wanted to emphasize that I was on this foreign space station, I was actually just spinning on my stool. It's really fun. So all of this kind of created the experience of being, in this working architecture firm, transported into a space station. But just to kind of leave off with that, I do like to have a lot of fun, and they are, sometimes very humorous. But there's something to, life after school, getting out of art school, and really thinking, sometimes even if you have a community of people around you, you're kind of working in isolation. And I did, especially during this time after having a child and, being a little homebound, feeling like I'm trying to reach out there, try to find my community again, and trying to make art again, and trying to do something like a meaningful contribution to the art world. So there's a little, serious undertones there, but I would love to hear from you guys if you have any questions. And I do have just a couple more slides for you, and it's just to show you what the study room looks like if you haven't been there. This is the study room where you can see print drawings and photographs in the flesh. So we've got 14,000 of them. If you ever want to come and make an appointment, Robin and Ryan come almost every semester, and I know you've been. So, but please come up because it blew my mind when